On a bright afternoon in Washington, the studio lights glowed warmly against the polished floor, reflecting off cameras that tracked every movement. Barron Trump sat in a sleek leather chair, his posture straight but his hands slightly trembling, on his lap. Across the room, a giant screen displayed the live video image of Burkina Faso's leader, General Ibrahim Traoré. The general's backdrop showed a modest office lined with shelves of books and a few framed photographs. His calm, steady gaze contrasted with the buzz of activity in the American television studio. Producers and camera operators moved quietly, behind the scenes, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets, knowing that any misstep could disrupt the delicate balance of a live broadcast. Barron had prepared for weeks for this moment. At 18, he was stepping into a spotlight far larger and brighter than any he had faced before. His family name carried weight around the world, and with that weight came expectations he sometimes felt were too heavy for his young shoulders. He had read dozens of briefing papers, practiced his delivery in front of mirrors, and even worked with media coaches to refine his tone. Yet no amount of preparation could perfectly simulate the hum of electricity that flared through the studio the moment the red, on-air light flickered to life. On the other side of the globe, in Ouagadougou, General Traoré faced his own anticipation. He had been invited as a guest of honor, recognized for leading his country through a period of deep struggle and uncertainty. Still, the general knew that interviews with Western media could be unpredictable. He adjusted the collar of his plain, military-style shirt and took a slow breath. The camera turned on, and a quiet confidence settled over him. His voice, when it finally came through the speakers in the Washington studio, was measured and firm. The show's host, a seasoned journalist, known for sharp questions and a smooth delivery, welcomed viewers with a practiced smile. He introduced the topic, the evolving relationship between the United States and nations across Africa, with a special focus on youth engagement and leadership. Then, in a deliberate turn, he said, "Joining us live is Ibrahim Traoré, the head of state of Burkina Faso, and here in our Washington studio, we have Barron Trump, representing the next generation of American leadership." The audience applauded politely, the sound echoing softly in the cavernous space. Barron offered a polite nod to the host, his eyes briefly flicking to the screen where General Traoré appeared. The general inclined his head in greeting as well. For a moment, the two young men, one just launching into adulthood, the other a relatively young leader in his 30s, met across an ocean. The host leaned in, microphone in hand, and asked the first question. "Barron, what do you see as the most important role for young people in shaping international relations today?" Barron took a breath. He had thought long and hard about this question. He began with a calm voice, carefully chosen words tapping into themes of collaboration and mutual respect. "I believe young people have a unique opportunity to build bridges," he said, "to challenge old assumptions and find new ways of working together across borders. We live in a time when technology connects us instantly, when social media can bring attention to issues overnight. It's our responsibility to use those tools wisely." The host nodded, then pivoted smoothly to include Traoré. "General, how do you view the role of youth in African politics and development?" Traoré smiled slightly, his tone warm but authoritative. He spoke of a rising generation in Burkina Faso of young people eager for education and entrepreneurship, of grassroots movements pushing for transparency and fairness. His words painted a picture of hope and determination, revealing both the challenges and the promise of his nation. Encouraged by Traoré's thoughtful response, the host then asked Barron to comment on the general's leadership. Barron hesitated only for a moment before agreeing that Traoré's focus on anti-corruption efforts and economic reforms was inspiring. But then, perhaps seeking to show his own insight, Barron added a more pointed remark. "While I respect what General Traoré has done, I do wonder about the legitimacy of a leader who came to power through military means rather than through a free and open democratic process. Doesn't Burkina Faso deserve a leader elected by its people?" The moment his words left his mouth, the atmosphere shifted. In the studio, Barron's confident tone wavered. The host paused, eyebrows raised, and the audience fell silent. On the screen, Traoré's face remained composed, but his eyes sharpened, ever so slightly. Behind Barron, some crew members exchanged quick glances. Barron realized he had stepped into risky territory, but his desire to appear informed and assertive had driven him forward. As Traoré listened, the camera stayed focused on him. He took a breath, leaned slightly toward his desktop camera, and spoke directly to Barron. His voice was calm but carried the weight of experience. He began by acknowledging the importance of elections in representing the will of the people. Then he gently corrected the assumption that his presidency lacked popular support. He explained how the former administration had failed to address deep economic inequality and rampant corruption, how many citizens had called for a change in leadership when traditional channels offered no real solutions. Traoré described the series of peaceful protests and the role of the military in responding to the popular outcry. He mentioned that international observers had been invited to assess the transition, offering independent reports that confirmed a broad base of civilian support for his reforms. He spoke of the creation of new oversight bodies, partnerships, with civil society groups and efforts to hold public officials accountable. Each point he made was backed by concrete examples: local initiatives to rebuild schools, partnerships with foreign investors to create jobs, programs to improve agricultural productivity. Back in the studio, Barron listened as his earlier words echoed in his mind. The host interjected with follow-up questions, probing deeper into the data Traoré cited. Barron, feeling the momentum shift, found himself at a loss for quick rejoinder. His well-practiced lines about technology and collaboration seemed flimsy in the face of Traoré's detailed explanations. The host gave Barron the chance to respond, but Barron's answer came haltingly, and he apologized for speaking too broadly, without all the facts. The audience seemed to sense the change in tone. What had begun as a respectful exchange evolved into a moment of reckoning, an instance where assumptions were challenged by clear evidence and lived experience. As the segment drew to a close, the host thanked both participants, summarizing the key insights from each. He noted how important it was to move beyond surface-level judgments and engage with the full context of complex political events. After the cameras stopped rolling, Barron sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. He realized that preparation alone was not enough. True understanding required listening and humility. In Ouagadougou, Traoré leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a small smile. He had navigated a delicate exchange with poise, and in doing so, he had brought a deeper level of awareness to millions of viewers. In that intense, polished studio space, two young men had met across continents and found both points of connection and moments of friction. What began as a routine interview transformed into a powerful lesson about the importance of representation, legitimacy, and the value of informed dialogue. And though the red on-air light had long since dimmed, the impact of their exchange was only just beginning to be felt around the world. Barron stepped off the set feeling his heart pound in his chest. The applause of the studio audience had faded, replaced by a heavy quiet as he walked past cables and lighting rigs. Behind him, the host offered a few warm words of thanks to both guests, but Barron barely heard them. His mind kept replaying the general's measured rebuttal, the confident way Traoré had laid out facts and figures, how he had named specific towns where schools were rebuilt, or villages where farmers now sold their crops at fair prices. Every detail had cut through Barron's carefully rehearsed talking points like a blade. Backstage, Barron's media coach met him with a sympathetic smile. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and asked how he was feeling. Barron managed a weak grin, trying to pretend he wasn't still shaken. His coach nodded knowingly, leading him to a quiet corner with a small table and two chairs. She handed him a bottle of water and encouraged him to talk through what had happened. Barron sank into the chair, unfolded his hands, and admitted that he'd underestimated Traoré. "I thought I knew the story," he said, voice low, "but I didn't know enough." Meanwhile, in social media land, the clip of Traoré's response went viral. Within minutes, hashtags like Ibrahim Traoré facts and Barron learns trended on Twitter. Short clips showed the general calmly dismantling Barron's assumption, overlaying upbeat music or dramatic captions. Memes appeared. One cartoon showed Barron holding an empty book labeled Research, while Traoré held a thick binder marked Evidence. Another showed Barron shipping out for a crash course in African politics. Across platforms, users praised Traoré's poise and criticized Barron's lack of homework. Producers in the control room monitored the buzz, marveling at how one segment could ignite such a firestorm online. They reached out to both teams for quick interviews to air reactions in an after-the-fact special. Barron's team hesitated, worried that more footage could deepen the sting, but they agreed to a brief follow-up. The next day, cameras were set up in a smaller studio, the lighting softer and less intimidating than the main stage. Barron sat down with a different host, someone known for gentle questions, hoping to repair his image. When the camera rolled, Barron took a steadying breath. He began by acknowledging that his question had been poorly framed. He expressed respect for Traoré's leadership and admitted that he had yet to learn the full story of Burkina Faso's journey under the general's guidance. He spoke of his own youth and inexperience, saying that he now saw how important it was to listen first, speak later. His voice was sincere, his eyes direct, and for a moment, viewers saw a young man willing to admit mistakes and grow from them. Across the ocean in Ouagadougou, General Traoré reviewed the follow-up segment on his office monitor. He allowed himself a small nod of approval. He had always believed that leadership meant standing firm when necessary, but also showing grace when others stumbled. The general decided to publish an open letter to Barron, praising the young man's humility and offering to share more insights about Burkina Faso's reforms. The letter was concise and respectful, inviting Barron to visit in person and see the progress firsthand. The news of the letter spread quickly. Journalists around the world picked up the story. A heads of state's public invitation to the scion of a former president's family. Headlines framed it as a turning point, an opportunity for genuine dialogue between generations and cultures. Analysts speculated that if Barron accepted, it could become a powerful symbol of cross-cultural understanding. Some critics warned against children of politicians making international trips in such a public way, but many more saw it as a rare chance to bridge gaps. Barron discussed the invitation with his parents in their private dining room at home. The atmosphere was warm and supportive. His mother placed a reassuring hand on his arm and reminded him that mistakes were part of learning. His father, thoughtful and measured, agreed that a visit could benefit Barron's education and public image. They spoke of logistics, security, scheduling, and the intense media spotlight that would follow. Barron listened carefully, weighing excitement and anxiety. He realized that accepting meant more than a photo op. It would demand him to study deeply and engage honestly. In the days that followed, Barron dove into research. He read books about Burkina Faso's history, watched documentaries on its cultural heritage, and interviewed policy experts to understand the nation's economic challenges. He learned about the Sahel region, the impact of climate change on agriculture, and the role of youth groups in civil society. His preparation was no longer a superficial checklist. It became a genuine quest to understand the lives of people, far removed from his own world. Meanwhile, Traoré arranged a detailed itinerary for Barron's potential visit. He coordinated meetings with schoolchildren in rural villages, farmers' cooperatives, and nonprofit leaders working to improve healthcare. He planned a roundtable with young entrepreneurs who had launched tech startups in Ouagadougou. He wanted Barron to see concrete examples of the reforms he had described on camera. Behind the scenes, aides worked on diplomatic clearances and security protocols, knowing that Barron's presence would attract both excitement and scrutiny. As plans solidified, both media teams prepared feature stories. Barron's team drafted human interest pieces about the son's coming-of-age journey, while Traoré's office prepared press releases highlighting international partnership. Each side recognized the power of narrative, a young American learning from an African leader, and a general showcasing his country's potential on the world stage. The storylines converged toward an unprecedented meeting, a blend of youthful curiosity and seasoned authority. In the quiet before the trip, Barron sat at his desk late one evening, Journal open, pen in hand. He jotted down questions he still wanted answered. How did local leaders rebuild trust after years of corruption? What role did traditional chiefs play alongside formal government structures? How did ordinary citizens view foreign investment? Each question reflected his growing awareness that real understanding required more than sound bites. It required genuine dialogue and first-hand experience. Back in Burkina Faso, General Traoré reflected on the journey that had led him here, from a young officer disillusioned by graft to an unexpected leader called upon to restore hope. He remembered the long nights spent poring over policy papers, the tense negotiations with community elders, and the anxious faces of soldiers who looked to him for guidance. He realized that hosting Barron was not just a diplomatic gesture. It was a chance to show a new generation that leadership could transcend borders and that young voices, even those from worlds apart, deserved respect and inclusion. With travel documents stamped and schedules finalized, the next chapter was ready to begin. Two young men linked by a moment of tension on live television, now prepared to meet in person, each eager to learn, each aware that the world would be watching. The rising action of their shared story was building toward a moment where assumptions and preconceptions might give way to deeper understanding and collaboration. And as the sun set over both Washington and Ouagadougou, the promise of their encounter glimmered with possibility. Barron's plane touched down in Ouagadougou just as the late morning sun burned away the last of the dawn haze. He stepped off the jet and was met on the tarmac by a small delegation from General Traoré's office, including a translator, a security detail, and one of the general's closest advisors. Barron carried a single backpack slung over one shoulder and adjusted the collar of his light jacket against the warm breeze. He felt a flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. As the convoy of black SUVs drove away from the airport, Barron glanced out the window at rolling fields dotted with acacia trees and simple clay houses. The land seemed vast and open under the cloudless sky. He tried to steady his racing thoughts by remembering his preparation. Questions about local governance, hopes for economic partnerships, and his desire to listen more than speak. The convoy arrived at the presidential guest house, a modest compound, surrounded by high walls and shaded gardens. Inside, Barron was led to a cool sitting room furnished with comfortable chairs and low tables bearing bowls of fresh fruit and glasses of water. He sat down and watched as the translator explained in French to one of Traoré's aides that the young American wished first to thank the general for his hospitality. Moments later, General Traoré entered the room. He wore a simple collared shirt and trousers, his posture relaxed but dignified. He extended his hand in greeting and Barron rose to meet him. Their handshake was firm and respectful. Traoré's warm smile put Barron at ease. The general invited Barron to take a seat. They spoke briefly in English before the translator summarized their remarks in French for the aide. To break the ice, Traoré asked Barron about his journey so far and how he was finding Burkina Faso's capital. Barron, recalling the translator's gentle encouragement, said he was amazed at the colors, the energy in the streets, and the kindness of the people he'd met on the way in. He mentioned the fruit stands he'd seen clustered near the airport gate and how he looked forward to tasting fresh mangoes. Traoré laughed and said that Barron must try the mangoes from Zongo Market. They were the sweetest in the region. He invited Barron to join him there later that afternoon. Their first meeting set a friendly tone. Traoré explained that he planned a full day for Barron, visits to local schools, an audience with village elders, and a meeting with young entrepreneurs at a co-working space in the city. Barron listened intently, making notes on his phone. He felt honored that Traoré had arranged such a rich itinerary, yet he also felt the weight of responsibility. To ask good questions, to listen with respect, and to share what he learned without judgment. Their conversation turned to the reforms Traoré had outlined on television. Barron asked about the oversight bodies that monitored government spending. Traoré described the new Anti-Corruption Commission, staffed by both civilian experts and retired judges. He said the commission had uncovered embezzlement cases in several ministries and was working with international partners to recover stolen funds. Barron asked how the commission kept its investigations independent. Traoré explained that its members had fixed terms, that they reported directly to the National Assembly rather than the presidency, and that their budgets were publicly audited. Barron nodded, impressed by the safeguards. He asked what challenges the commission still faced. Traoré admitted that some officials tried to intimidate investigators, and that public distrust lingered from years of unchecked graft. He said, they were building public trust through transparency, posting investigation updates online, holding community forums, and partnering with local radio stations to report progress in simple, clear language. His commitment to openness struck Barron as genuine and courageous. After their discussion, they rose and walked through a shaded courtyard to a waiting vehicle. As they drove through city streets, vendors waved, and children ran alongside, calling, "Greetings." Barron waved back, marveling at the genuine warmth of the response. He realized that unlike staged photo ops he had seen elsewhere, this felt spontaneous, a people welcoming him not for his surname, but as a curious visitor. Their first stop was a primary school in a bustling neighborhood. Traoré and Barron stepped into a sunlit classroom where bright posters covered the walls and straw hats hung on pegs. The teacher introduced Barron as a guest eager to learn about their school. Dozens of children sat at wooden desks, their eyes wide with excitement. Barron knelt beside a group of girls coloring pictures of local wildlife. He asked them what they liked to draw and what they hoped to become when they grew up. One girl said she wanted to be a doctor to help people in her village. Another said she dreamed of becoming an engineer to build better roads. Watching the children, Barron felt a surge of hope. He asked the teacher how the school managed with its limited resources. The teacher explained that textbooks were shared, that volunteer parents repaired desks, and that a local charity provided midday meals for students who came from poor families. Barron asked if there were books about other countries. The teacher nodded and led him to a small bookshelf, holding a battered set of world atlases and a few donated storybooks. Barron picked up an atlas and pointed to the United States. He asked the children if they had heard of the Statue of Liberty. They giggled and shook their heads. He pointed to Burkina Faso on the map and praised them for their knowledge of their own land. The children beamed. Outside the school, Traoré and Barron greeted a group of parents and community elders. One elder, an elderly woman with silver hair braided and adorned with beads, asked Barron what he thought of their school. Barron spoke honestly about his admiration for their resourcefulness and commitment to education. He said he wished American students had the same community spirit. The elder smiled and patted his hand. "We do what we must," she said softly. Her words struck Barron. Necessity had nurtured creativity here. Next, they traveled to a nearby village school farther outside the city. The dirt roads wound past fields of millet and sorghum, each swaying in the gentle breeze. In that classroom, desks were made of rough-hewn planks and sunlight streamed through gaps in the walls. Barron watched students recite lessons in French and in Moor, their native language. He noticed that more resources were needed, no textbooks on desks, and many children wrote lessons in the dust with sticks. He asked Traoré how the government planned to support remote schools. Traoré said they had launched a program to build durable classrooms and distribute solar-powered radios so that lessons could be broadcast even where teachers were scarce. He acknowledged it would take years to reach every village, but said they were committed. Barron thanked the children for teaching him their songs. They sang a melody in Moor, voices clear and joyful. As they prepared to leave, a young boy offered Barron a small clay whistle shaped like a bird. Barron accepted gratefully, promising to keep it as a reminder of their meeting. By mid-afternoon, they arrived at Zongo Market. The air was alive with voices hawking produce, mangoes, bananas, peppers, and stalls of colorful fabrics. The scent of roasted groundnuts wafted through the aisles. Traoré led Barron to a vendor whose stall was piled high with mangoes. The vendor offered them each a ripe fruit. Barron bit into his and tasted sweetness he had never imagined, juices running down his chin. He laughed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Traoré smiled at his delight and explained that this mango variety was known locally for its deep orange flesh and rich flavor. They walked through the market, greeting vendors and sampling fresh juices. Barron talked with a young woman selling handmade baskets. He asked how she learned the craft. She said her grandmother had taught her, weaving baskets to help support her family. Barron admired the intricate patterns and noted how each basket told a story through its design. The woman explained the meanings of different colors: red for courage, green for the land, yellow for the sun. Barron thanked her for sharing her culture. As they left the market, Traoré remarked that one of his goals was to promote local artisans on the world stage. He wanted Burkina Faso's craftsmanship to be recognized and supported. Barron asked if there were plans for international trade fairs. Traoré nodded, describing partnerships with European buyers and online platforms that would help artisans sell goods globally. Barron thought of ways young Americans might support those efforts, through fair trade programs or cultural exchanges. In the late afternoon, they met with a group of young entrepreneurs in a small co-working space. The room hummed with laptops and quiet conversation. Traoré introduced Barron to a software developer who had built an app connecting farmers to buyers in nearby towns. The developer demonstrated how the app tracked market prices and arranged transportation. Barron listened closely, impressed by the problem-solving. He asked about the app's funding and sustainability. The developer said they had received seed funding from a social impact fund and charged a small transaction fee that went back into development. Another entrepreneur, a social media strategist, explained how she helped small businesses build online presence on platforms like Facebook and WhatsApp. She showed Barron a campaign promoting a women's cooperative that produced shea butter. Barron noted how important digital tools were in modern economies. He asked what challenges they faced. When dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the warm light filtered through lace curtains into the guest house room where Barron lay awake. He listened to the distant sounds of the city waking up: the crow of a rooster, the rumble of a delivery truck, the soft chatter of early risers. He swung his feet over the edge of the bed and dressed in light cotton trousers and a collared shirt. Today, General Traoré had planned a visit to government offices and a community town hall meeting, followed by an evening cultural performance. Barron felt both excitement and a quiet happiness. He had already learned so much, but he knew there were deeper lessons waiting. After breakfast, they traveled to the Ministry of Agriculture. The building stood in a busy district, its walls painted a faded yellow and guarded by soldiers in smart uniforms. Inside, Barron was introduced to the minister, a woman in her 50s whose face showed both strength and kindness. She led them into a conference room where large maps of Burkina Faso were spread across a long table. The minister explained how the recent climate challenges, droughts, and erratic rains had threatened the country's food supply. She showed reports of crop failures, rising food prices, and the need for new farming techniques. Traoré asked insightful questions about irrigation projects and the use of drought-resistant seeds. Barron listened closely as the minister described partnerships with international research centers that were testing new seed varieties. She spoke of training programs for farmers, where experts taught simple water conservation methods and soil preservation. Barron noted how each program combined modern science with local knowledge. Farmers who had tended these lands for generations shared wisdom about planting times and natural pest control. Barron asked how smallholder farmers could afford the new seeds and equipment. The minister explained a voucher system that allowed farmers to receive subsidized seeds, with repayment based on their harvest. She said the system had reduced debt burdens and encouraged farmers to adopt better practices. When Barron asked about monitoring outcomes, she showed a dashboard of data, village by village, tracking yields before and after the program. He was impressed by the clear measurements and accountability built into the system. Outside the ministry, a small group of farmers had gathered to greet the general. They wore work clothes, dusty from the fields, and carried baskets of fresh, produced tomatoes, okra, and millet stalks. One farmer, a tall man with sun-weathered skin, offered Traoré a sheaf of millet as thanks. Barron joined in the greeting, shaking hands and asking simple questions about their harvest. The farmers spoke of pride in feeding their families and hoped that new methods would protect them against future droughts. Barron felt humbled by their resilience and dedication. Next, Traoré and Barron moved to the town hall in a closely packed neighborhood. The hall was a low building with open-air windows and plastic chairs arranged in neat rows. News had spread that the head of state and his special guest would appear, and villagers gathered early to secure seats. When Barron and Traoré entered, the crowd broke into applause. Women in colorful dresses clapped in rhythm, and children pressed forward, their eyes bright with curiosity. A local council member took the microphone and welcomed everyone. He explained that today was a chance for ordinary citizens to ask questions directly of their leaders. Barron noticed how the atmosphere blended respect with frankness. People felt safe to speak honestly. The first speaker was an elderly man who asked why healthcare in remote areas remained limited. He spoke of clinics, without medicine and health workers who struggled to reach distant villages. Traoré listened attentively. He acknowledged the gaps in the system and described efforts to improve rural health services, deploying mobile clinics, training community health volunteers, and securing partnerships for affordable medicines. Barron chimed in, asking how volunteers were selected and supported. Traoré explained that volunteers were chosen by their communities and received ongoing training and stipends. Barron noted how this approach built trust. Villagers cared for their own neighbors, and the government strengthened those bonds. Another speaker, a young mother, asked about education for her children. She worried that school fees and uniforms were too costly for many families. Traoré responded by outlining a plan to provide free primary education and subsidized uniforms. He said the government was also working with NGOs to supply textbooks and stationery. Barron raised his hand and asked about school attendance for girls, who sometimes stayed home to help with chores. Traoré smiled and said that they had launched programs to encourage girls' education, including midday meals and community-led awareness campaigns. Barron admired how targeted incentives addressed cultural barriers. As the questions continued, Barron observed how trust grew between the citizens and their leaders. When it was his turn to speak, he stood and thanked the community for sharing their concerns. In simple words, he expressed admiration for their courage in speaking out and promised to share their stories with audiences back home. The crowd responded with warm applause. Barron realized that in this room he was not the son of a former president, but simply someone who had come to listen. After the town hall, Traoré invited Barron to a nearby workshop where artisans learned leatherworking skills. The workshop was a cool, open space where strips of leather hung from wooden racks. Skilled craftsmen demonstrated how they cut and stitched raw hides into sandals, bags, and belts. A young apprentice showed Barron how to guide the leather under a sewing machine. Barron tried his hand at stitching a small piece, his fingers fumbling but careful. When he finally produced a slightly crooked seam, the craftsman laughed kindly and clapped him on the shoulder. Barron slipped the sample into his pocket, knowing it would remind him of the hands-on work that underpinned local livelihoods. As afternoon turned to evening, Traoré and Barron returned to the guest house to prepare for a cultural performance in the palace courtyard. Barron changed into traditional Burkinabe attire, a flowing bubu dyed in deep indigo with embroidered patterns. He admired the intricate designs and felt honored to wear a garment rooted in local tradition. Traoré wore a matching outfit in earth tones, his broad smile signaling that he was pleased with Barron's choice. They made their way to the courtyard, which was filled with wooden benches and woven mats. Torches flickered along the perimeter, casting a warm glow. Drummers sat in a circle at one end, their hands poised over large hand drums. Performers in colorful costumes waited nearby, holding stringed instruments and rattles. The audience included government officials, diplomats, artists, and community leaders. Barron felt the energy of anticipation as night fell and the cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The performance began with a solo drummer whose rhythms echoed like the heartbeat of the land. Soon dancers entered, their feet moving in complex patterns across the stone floor. They wore masks representing local spirits, and their movements told stories of creation, harvest, and community. Barron watched in awe as acrobats leapt high and moved with precision. The dancers invited audience members to join clapping rhythms, and soon everyone's hands beat in unison. During an interlude, a singer stepped forward and sang in the native language, her voice clear and melodic. A translator quietly whispered, the meaning to Barron, a poem of unity, resilience, and hope. Barron felt a lump in his throat, moved by the power of music to convey deep emotion. He caught Traoré's eye, and the general nodded as if to say, "This is our soul on display." After the performance, Traoré introduced Barron to the performers and artisans behind the show. Barron shook hands, thanked them for sharing their culture, and asked about the inspiration for their dances. A lead dancer explained that each movement honored ancestors and expressed gratitude for the Earth's bounty. Barron promised to carry their stories forward, to let others know how art and tradition sustained communities. As the night wound down, Traoré and Barron walked through lantern-lit corridors back to the guest house. Barron reflected on the day's experiences, policy meetings, community dialogue, hands-on learning, and a stirring cultural celebration. He realized that leadership was not confined to offices or stages. It lived in classrooms, fields, workshops, and ceremonies. He felt a bond with the people he had met, a shared humanity that transcended nationality and status. Before parting for the night, Traoré placed a hand on Barron's shoulder and said quietly, "Tonight, you saw our past and our dreams. Remember that every question you ask and every story you tell carries the weight of real lives." Barron nodded, understanding that he had become a bridge between two worlds. In the stillness of the night, he lay awake again, thinking of drum beats and town hall voices, of farmers and dancers. He knew that tomorrow would bring more discoveries, and that his journey in Burkina Faso was teaching him lessons that would stay with him long after he returned home. By the time dawn's first light seeped through the curtains, Barron lay awake again. Today was his last full day in Burkina Faso. He could hear the soft murmur of early activity outside, a rooster crowing, a vendor arranging goods at a nearby stall, and the distant hum of a motorcycle. He dressed quickly, pausing to fold the indigo boo-boo from the night before and place it carefully in his satchel. He wanted to carry its memory home. Over breakfast in the guest house courtyard, Barron and General Traoré shared a quiet moment. Traoré poured fresh coffee into 2 small cups and handed one to Barron. They sipped in companionable silence, watching birds flit among flowering bushes. Barron felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sad that his journey was ending. Grateful for everything he had learned. Traoré offered a warm smile and said, "You carry our stories now. Make them count where you go." Their first stop was a debriefing at the Presidential Conference Center. A small team of journalists, both local and international, gathered to hear Barron speak about his visit. The room hummed with cameras and notepads. Barron approached the podium with steady steps, took a deep breath, and spoke from the heart. He thanked Traoré and the people of Burkina Faso for their hospitality and openness. He described classrooms where children learned against the odds, farmers who toiled under a blazing sun to feed their families, entrepreneurs using technology to solve real problems, and artists whose music carried the soul of a nation. When asked what surprised him most, Barron paused thoughtfully. "I came expecting to be impressed by political speeches and official arguments," he said. "But what moved me most were the stories of everyday people, stories of resilience, creativity, and hope. I've seen that true leadership isn't about power or prestige. It's about listening, adapting, and serving the needs of your community." Reporters scribbled furiously, and some nodded in agreement. Barron felt a surge of confidence. He had found his own voice informed by genuine experience. After the press conference, Traoré invited Barron to plant a tree in the grounds of the center, a symbol of growth and enduring friendship. Together they dug a small hole in the red earth, placed a young sapling inside, and covered its roots with soil. Traoré handed Barron a watering can, and Barron gently poured water at the base. The tree stood slender and green against the bright sky. Traoré said, "May this tree remind us of today, of how our friendship can grow and bear fruit." Barron laid a hand on the tree's trunk and nodded, promising to return one day. Next, they visited the National Museum, where artifacts traced the country's history from ancient kingdoms to modern-day challenges. Barron walked slowly through exhibits of carved masks, traditional textiles, and historical photographs. He lingered before a display showing early independence movements, imagining the courage of leaders who stood up for self-determination. A museum guide explained how each piece represented a chapter in a long story of struggle and renewal. Barron asked questions about the materials, the craftsmanship, and the hidden meanings in the patterns. He realized that history wasn't just dates on a page, it was the living memory of a people. By midday, Barron and Traoré arrived at a community health center on the outskirts of the city for one final visit. The center was modest, a single building with a waiting area, examination rooms, and a small pharmacy. Nurses in crisp white uniforms moved between rooms attending to patients. Traoré introduced Barron to a nurse who explained the center's role in treating common illnesses like malaria and malnutrition. She spoke of outreach programs where health workers visited remote villages by motorcycle. Barron watched as a mother carried her toddler who coughed quietly. The nurse examined the child and prepared a dose of medicine. Barron felt the weight of healthcare inequity and the determination of those working to close that gap. Before leaving, Barron knelt beside a small play area where children waited for their checkups. He smiled at a boy drawing on a chalkboard. The boy looked up, shy but curious. Barron encouraged him to show his drawing, an outline of a big house and a smiling family. Barron praised the picture and asked what he wanted to be when he grew up. The boy said he wanted to be a doctor so he could help children like himself. Barron stood, touched by the boy's aspiration, and promised to remember his dream long after he returned home. In the late afternoon, back at the guest house, Barron packed his bags. He folded shirts and trousers, tucked study notes into a folder, and placed the clay whistle and the bit of leather stitching into a small box on his desk. Each item held a memory of faces, conversations, and lessons learned. Traoré's aide brought a leather-bound journal as a parting gift, its cover embossed with Burkina Faso's coat of arms. Inside, there was a handwritten note from Traoré. To Barron, as you return, may your words honor the journey we shared. Continue to listen, question, and grow. Barron touched the inscription, his eyes shining. That evening, the airport lights shimmered in the dusk as Barron boarded the plane. General Traoré stood near the entrance of the terminal, flanked by aides and security personnel. He held the clay whistle and leather sample Barron had given him earlier. Barron waved through the window as he found his seat, and Traoré lifted his hand in farewell. The plane's engines hummed, and as it began to taxi, Barron pressed his forehead against the cool glass. He gazed at the runway lights receding into the distance, feeling both a tug of nostalgia and a rush of anticipation for what lay ahead. During the flight, Barron reflected on the whirlwind of experiences. Every classroom conversation, every town hall question, every shared laugh over mango juice. He thought about the tree he had planted, the journal in his carry-on, and the promise he had made to tell the world what he had seen. He opened his notebook and began to write. Notes for speeches, ideas for articles, plans for educational programs. His pen moved quickly, fueled by inspiration and a sense of purpose. When the plane touched down in Washington, the late evening air felt cooler and more familiar. Barron passed through customs and emerged into the arrival hall, where a small group of family members and close friends waited. His mother rushed forward and hugged him tightly. His father patted his back with a proud smile. They had watched the interview and followed every news report of his visit. Barron realized that they too had learned alongside him, gaining a deeper understanding of global challenges and human connections. In the days that followed, Barron sat down for interviews with major news outlets. He spoke of Burkina Faso's resilience, of General Traoré's leadership, and of the countless individuals who had welcomed him with open hearts. He organized a photo exhibition featuring his own snapshots from the trip, children drawing in classrooms, farmers with their harvests, artisans weaving leather. Proceeds from the exhibition went to a scholarship fund for Burkinabe students to study abroad. Barron worked with charities to channel support for health clinics and educational initiatives he had seen in person. Meanwhile, General Traoré used Barron's visit to launch a youth ambassador program. Young Burkinabe men and women were selected to travel abroad and share their stories, just as Barron had. They returned with new ideas and skills, creating a cycle of exchange that bridged continents. In a televised address, Traoré praised the program as a testament to the power of genuine dialogue and respect. Months later, Barron received a letter from Traoré marked by the presidential seal. Inside was a photograph of the tree they had planted, now taller and stronger, its leaves fluttering in a gentle breeze. Traoré wrote, "Our friendship grows alongside this tree. May it remind us that when we meet in good faith, we plant seeds of understanding that flourish over time." Barron placed the photograph next to his journal, a symbol of a journey that had transformed him. In school, Barron spoke at a global affairs seminar, recounting his experiences in Burkina Faso. Students listened with rapt attention as he described classrooms without books, town hall meetings alive with honest debate, and drummers whose rhythms spoke of unity. He stressed the responsibility of young people to listen to voices different from their own, and to approach the world with curiosity, rather than judgment. His words resonated. Many classmates volunteered for language exchanges or started fundraisers for educational materials. Looking back, Barron realized that the live television exchange with General Traoré was only the beginning. The real journey had taken him into villages, classrooms, clinics, workshops, and community halls. It had shown him that true leadership was grounded in empathy, accountability, and mutual respect. As he grew older, he carried those lessons into his own endeavors, whether working on youth initiatives, supporting cross-cultural education, or simply listening when someone shared their story. And so, the story of Barron Trump and General Ibrahim Traoré became more than a headline. It became a living example of what can happen when two young leaders from different worlds choose to listen, to learn, and to plant seeds of friendship that would one day bear fruit far beyond a single broadcast.